Everybody Hates Rand is a Wheel of Time podcast that will contain spoilers for all 14 books. So if you're anti-spoiler, stop this, read all 14 books, and come back. We'll be here, waiting.
Our title is a joke and is meant to be taken as such. Everybody in this context refers to us and our cats. You are free to feel however you want about Rand. He's a fictional character. Please don't DM us.
The world is a mess, Dark One stretching out his hand. The dragon's reborn, the fire's been fanned, but everybody hates Rand. Everybody hates Rand. Everybody hates Rand.
Okay, we have to talk about Wheel of Time at some point, I guess.
We have to talk about
There's
this
not much to say.
fucking farce of a trial where the authors were like, I saw one courtroom drama, so I know that I can use a secret law loophole to make this feel fun and satisfying. And I was like, I think Perrin should have been executed, actually. That is how this should have ended. If we were going to go through this fucking farce of a trial, you should have been executed.
Yeah, it was very structured, like an episode of Law and Order without any of the trappings of an episode of Law and Order. Like, the thing about Law and Order is that it's like, we're just skipping around from scene to scene, you know, and every time it gives you like a little time and date stamp to be like, a bunch of shit has happened between this and this, and all of the little like bureaucratic paperwork and shit has been going on. But this one is just like, they showed up. There's no evidence. There's no due process. It's extremely funny. So I'm like, why are we still treating this like
a trial when it's literally just Byar stands up, gets to say a bunch of nonsense.
Oh yeah, anyone can say anything that they want, yeah.
He does not have to provide any type of evidence. He's barely being cross-examined, and then Perrin gets up and says whatever he wants, which is absolutely the worst possible things he could say, just a series of the worst possible choices you could make. Perrin's really giving I'm gonna be my own lawyer energy. I'm gonna represent myself on the stand.
Yeah, Ted Bundy style. Yeah. I do have to say, this is Everybody Hates Rand, your friendly Wheel of Time podcast. I'm Emily Jusha.
And I'm Sally Goodger.
And I'm sure everyone's seen this by now, but like, you're probably all familiar with the app Dropout and the show Game Changer, which mostly does like improv style shows.
Right.
And there's once an improv prompt that's like a defendant stupidly interrupting his lawyer.
Yeah.
And it's like the guy playing the lawyer does a long monologue. He's very good at those. Just like being like, you can't prove anything. And then the guy playing the defendant just goes, yeah, I killed him.
Yeah, Brennan, the lawyer, is like, is the defendant a perfect man? No. And Zach interrupts with, yeah, I killed him. And it's such a good bit.
Yeah, like, sorry to betray the punchline to you, but it is still funny when you know what's coming.
Yeah.
It's incredibly funny, and that was exactly what Perrin was doing this entire time.
Absolutely.
Except without a lawyer present. He's just like, yeah, I killed them.
Yeah, I killed those guys, but it doesn't count because my friends, the wolves, were in danger. I can speak to those. And Morgause, the judge, is like, what?
Yeah, he's like, I could prove it. Well, like, what? He's gonna get some wolves to trot in here and juggle? And I'm like,
I know.
Bestie?
Like, I could prove it. I'll just need to bring wolves into the courtroom.
And Morgause is like,
we're not bringing wild animals into the courtroom, Perrin.
Yeah, that's nuts. Even if you can talk to them. Like, what the fuck? I don't think they'll want to go into the courtroom. Like, what wolves? Do you think Hopper would be like, sure, bestie.
Yeah.
I'll go parade in front of your human friends. Walk on two legs for you and, like, that's not weird.
Put on my nicest suit. Make sure it's a color that's appealing to the jury, which is no one. There's no jury.
Some of my best friends are wolves.
Yeah.
That's what Perrin is saying.
Yeah. It is the most absurd. I keep using the word farce, but, like, what else can we say? Okay. We start. Perrin is like, rally the troops, everybody. We need to get the fuck out of here. Because he keeps being like, Slayer is this massive threat to us or whatever, and that doesn't seem real to me.
Perrin has pieced it together that the purple dome that he's been seeing in the wolf dream is A, connected to Slayer. that Slayer is, like, guarding the Purple Dome, and that,
Yeah.
you know, therefore that's something worth guarding. And B, that the Purple Dome is connected to the inability to make gateways currently.
Right.
It's not affecting channeling otherwise, just gateways.
Right.
And he's, like, sent Grady and Niald to, like, he's like, okay, if you just, like, go a certain way, is there a point at which you can make gateways? And they're like, yeah, but, you know, obviously that sort of, like, negates the usefulness of gateways.
Yeah.
If you have to march 20 miles in order to make one.
Yeah.
So it's like, they can't just teleport out of here after the trial to avoid a big battle. You know, flee from the bad guys. So Perrin's kind of like, okay, well, you know, worst case scenario, the whole army, we're gonna have to fight the White Cloaks and then just start marching until we get out of the zone. But he's also like, as soon as this trial's over, I'm going to go into the Wolf Dream and try and take care of it, whatever that means. But, you know, until before that, he has to get through the trial, which might mean going and having a battle.
Yeah.
Which he's very concerned about preventing, even though he's like, we also have to be ready, so everyone has to get ready as though they were going to battle, but I don't want it to happen, which Gaul later is like, yeah, I get you don't want to, like, kill people, but you can't, like, tell people they're going to battle a bunch of times and then not have them do battle. It's sort of like psychological warfare.
Yeah.
It's not great for morale. And Perrin's like, I don't give a fuck about morale. And Gaul's like, yeah, that's evident.
Yeah. Perrin's like, it's a good thing that we didn't have to fight. And Gaul's like, didn't say it wasn't.
No.
I'm just pointing
Just
out.
said, maybe don't, you know,
Maybe
making a pattern out of it.
Yeah.
Bestie. And
Poor
Perrin's-
Gaul.
Yeah, I know. Gaul, the most long-suffering of all the side characters on Wheel of Time, besides Grady and Niald. Somehow all of the most long-suffering side characters are attached to Perrin.
How did this happen?
And yeah, how could this possibly have happened? Anyway, Perrin's talking to, like, the Two Rivers guys, Dannil.
Dannil.
Danimal. You know, like
There's a
those old-
throwback with the Sprouse twins.
What?
Weren't they like the Danimals
They the
ambassadors for a
spokesperson?
while?
Spokesman?
Spokes twins.
Spokes twins for Danimal.
I watched a lot of Disney Channel, Sweet Life and Zack and Cody in particular, so maybe they were early onset targeted ads towards me.
Oh, gotcha. No, I believe you. I'm just like, those two things didn't have a crossover in my mind until now, but it makes a lot of sense. Perrin's like, Dannil, whatever Fail is gonna have you do, like, fine, just can you please not do it until I signal you to do it, because I don't want to, like, jump the gun. And I think Fail will jump the gun. And Dannil's like, okay, that's fine. He talks to Niald briefly, says something about how he wishes Elias would come back, which in my head I was like, oh, so maybe Elias is doing something in connection to the trial, you know, like finding evidence of some kind.
Yeah.
No, Elias just isn't there. I don't know where he went.
Parents like, I sent him away. And it's like,
okay.
okay, why would you send away the one man who could
Where
also
them?
talk to wolves and might be able to provide some concrete evidence?
Yeah.
Not that you need it for this ridiculous puppet show.
But the whole time, Perrin's just like, I got a bad feeling about this. He's like, something's happening. I think we're walking into a trap. I think there's some sort of ambush happening. And it's like, okay, you know,
Trust
vibes.
your instincts, I guess.
Just your vibes. It feels like, I trust your instincts later on. And I'm like, yeah, I mean, I guess if he's a wolf, you might as well.
But he's also like, I feel like we're walking into a trap, and I'm like, a trap where everyone in the courtroom is convinced that you're guilty?
Yeah, that's the definition of, yeah, you are. Anyway.
You already said you're guilty, Perrin, so whatever.
Perrin and Fail talk. Perrin's like, I'm upset that I can't go to Rand yet, even though he's in danger. And Fail's like, you don't know Rand's in danger. And Perrin's like, I do, because I see him every time I think of him. And Fail's like, this might as well happen.
Yeah.
Fail's like, sure.
Whatever.
Okay.
My husband might also be able to do this weird thing. Sure.
Yeah. Could you stop saying odd shit?
I just need you to stop saying odd
Like you
shit.
smell fear. Anyway, Oh, there's like weirdly in the fail section, there's a weird point where
Oh, yeah.
it switches to Perrin's point of view.
Yeah, usually there's like a little page break, between point of view
Yeah,
switches.
I think it's just like a weird editing miss thing, though. There have been a lot of typos in this book.
Yeah.
So, just... Ugh,
Yeah, it's
sort of rushed through the presses. But yeah, there's just like a paragraph where it's suddenly in Perrin's point of view, which is bizarre. Anyway, they walk up to this, like, little courtroom that's been set up that's just, like, Morgoth sitting on a bunch of boxes and then, two sides of the courtroom, which anyone could sit anywhere because there are no lawyers.
Yeah.
Which just made me curious mostly. I was just like, did they not have lawyers in medieval times?
Oh, that's a good question. I don't know in the
This
profession.
isn't even, like, medieval times, This is more, like, 18th, 17th century.
Right.
Have been the vibes of Wheel of Time, so it's like... At what point did we get lawyers?
Shall we Google it?
I guess after the Constitution in America. No, there were lawyers.
I feel like some of the founding fathers were like trained in law.
Yeah.
Lawyer. When
were lawyers invented? When did they burst from the earth?
When were lawyers invented? The origins of lawyers and the first founders of law make their appearance in ancient Greece and Rome.
Oh, yeah, duh.
Orators, yeah. Did they have lawyers in the 1800s? Seems like yes.
Pretty sure.
So, who was the first lawyer?
Who was the first lawyer? Tell me more.
So yeah, definitely in Greece and Rome. In Western Europe, the legal profession went into a decline during the Dark Ages, re-emerging during the 12th and 13th centuries.
Well, that's a lot earlier than... So, anyway.
So, Perrin should have a lawyer, is what we're saying.
Why do we have a courtroom drama without lawyers? And also, it would be extremely funny if, like, Grady or Neild was a lawyer.
Neild was just like, oh yeah, I'm a Juris Doctor. And we're all like, what?
Excuse you? And he's like, I had a life before I went to...
Mazrim Thames School for Special Boys.
Or just, like, anyone. I don't know. If Morgoth is a queen in disguise, why couldn't Basilkiel be a lawyer in disguise?
Yeah, on doing research.
Perrin's Taviran. He should be able to stumble across lawyers left and right.
Like a natural magnetism towards lawyers.
This series is seriously lacking in lawyers.
It would be very funny. Like, again, we could also have a lawyer following Rand around being like, that's illegal.
Yeah, a lawyer should be following Rand around at all times. I think we've already talked about how he should be in front of the War Crimes Ethics Board, but it would also be extremely funny if he just had a lawyer.
Following around being like, nope, not advised.
The closest we have is Bulwer.
Yeah, Bulwer could be a lawyer. That makes a lot of sense.
And then it would be like, oh, there's a point to Bulwer.
Yeah. He's not just a spy master and a secretary. He's also
a trained lawyer.
A trained lawyer. Bar certified.
But then we wouldn't... If there was a lawyer, we wouldn't have a chance for Perrin to be, like, Mr. Integrity about this whole thing. Because the whole... you're saying this trial is a farce, which it is, because there's not much point to a trial if the trial goes that everyone just stands up and tells the truth.
Yeah.
I know that sounds sort of antithetical to the legal system.
Sure.
In an ideal world, people would just stand up and tell the truth.
Right.
But in the real legal system, there's the Fifth Amendment. Perrin is the defendant. He's not obligated to incriminate himself.
Mm-hmm.
The burden of evidence is on the prosecution.
Mm-hmm.
And the only evidence they have is the word of 2 white cloaks, one of whom lies immediately afterward.
Mm-hmm.
If Perrin's... I was sitting there reading that thing about how Byar's like, I give the whole story about Perrin. And then he finishes up with that, and then he's like, and by the way, he also killed Mr. Bornhold. And Perrin's like, no, I didn't. And everyone's like, yeah, how do you know that, Byar? And he's like, I don't actually, but I wish that it were true.
Yeah.
I sort of want it to happen.
Right.
And everyone's like, oh, suddenly we're getting the skeevies about Byar.
Yeah.
And I'm like, okay, if I were Perrin's lawyer at that point, I would be like, okay, if we can't trust his word about this thing, what else can we not trust his word about?
Yeah, that's reasonable doubt in and of itself, basically.
Yeah, you'd be like, he's an unreliable witness, and you just have this one other guy.
Yeah.
Which one witness is not certifiable. So, yeah, this could have been an easy case. Just be like, you don't have proof.
You don't have sufficient proof. And also, like...
Except the Perrin keeps being like, yeah, I killed them.
I killed them. Also, this question ends up getting settled at the end when Perrin agrees he will submit to Galad's judgment after the last battle. But Perrin walks into the courtroom and is like, Galad, I want your word that this won't turn into a battle. And Galad's like, only if you agree to submit yourself to the verdict. And Perrin's like, no.
And then he does that at the end. He changes his mind halfway through and is like, actually, I will submit myself to the verdict as long as it happens after the last battle.
Yeah.
Because again, the point of this whole scene is that Perrin has to be Mr. Integrity.
Yeah, like, I do keep calling it a farce because I think just in terms of, what you pointed out, like, an actual legal argument, like, yes, in an ideal world, people would just stand up and be like, this is what happened, or admit to their guilt. But the purpose of trial is, of course, to win, not to be, like, really cynical about it. But I think there is some, like, you go back to, like, what is it, John Adams or whoever defended the first murder case or whatever. I can't remember.
Yeah, it was one of those guys.
But just being like, everybody is entitled to, have legal defense, So there's something to being said to that, because there's a lot of ways in which, the legal system misses people, and people fall through the cracks and are subject to a lot of discrimination. So the legal system is really tricky and gray, and it flip-flops between being wildly unethical and wildly ethical and helpful. That's how it is, at least in America.
Yeah, I'd rather have one than not have one, but the one we have is definitely flawed.
Definitely flawed. But it just feels so... And maybe I'm comparing it way too much to, like, legal systems that I am familiar with, but the fact that nobody else is allowed to speak, blah, 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 the whole thing just feels incredibly ridiculous. Especially, as we'll get to at the end, Morgaz's verdict is just, like, stupid, I think. And we go through all of it for nothing. Perrin does not necessarily have to face judgment, and he's not going to do it immediately, so why did we do this? Mm-hmm. But yes, your point is true that Perrin is doing this for the sake of integrity, like all the Ale are, at least Gaul, they mentioned, and I assume the other Ale have a similar opinion. Like, Gaul is like, this is incredibly honorable. Like, if he made a mistake, which he has owned up to, like, he should definitely face punishment, even if that is execution. Like, we've seen in this series and fail references that the Ale will often go towards an execution with their head held high because they feel like that's their duty. So Perrin is being Mr. Integrity and owning up to his actions and facing the consequences of those. I get that that's the point. The whole thing just feels really hollow to me.
Yeah, I think it would, resound a lot better if it wasn't the fucking White Cloaks we were talking about.
Baby.
If Perrin had killed 2 farmers way back when, I'd be gung-ho for this trial. You know? I'd be like, okay, cool. Love to see some consequences. Yeah. But... we're talking about the domestic terrorist group that had no right to be in Andor anyway.
Yeah, so we keep calling them domestic terrorists, which they are because they're so KKK coded, but they are also committing international acts of terror across multiple borders.
State lines.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's like, and for seemingly the first time in the entire series, we enter this courtroom and Morgause is like, alludes to that fact.
Yeah.
And her verdict hinges on that fact. Mm-hmm. That the White Cloaks are not, like, an Andoran force, we're Andoran citizens. And that, they're not really... they don't get the benefit of, like, the extent of Andoran law.
Yeah.
But, like, it's sort of too little too late, At this point. Like, it's fine for Morgause to be like, oh, yeah, and by the way, like... White Cloaks don't get full rights in Andor, but also it's like, then why are we having this fucking trial in the first place?
Yeah. Like, then...
like, she ends up... Morgause's verdict is like, okay, yes, by his own admission, Perrin did kill 2 White Cloaks. His defense of that fact is that they killed the wolves, which are his friends. And she, very diplomatically, I must say, is like... according to Perrin, the wolves are his special friends, whom he telepathically connects to. But Perrin, unfortunately, under the law, wolves are not protected the same way human beings are. So it's not a sufficient defense. So you still did murder. Again, by your own admission. She's like, but... since they're White Cloaks, like, basically this just falls under part of the law that's, like, mercenary troops, clashing. it's basically a brawl fight.
Yeah.
Except no one is a citizen. She's like, and therefore, it has a lesser sentence. Which I'm just like, under what rule? That I think deserves to be picked apart a little bit. It was Perrin and Egg and some wolves.
Yeah.
How come they are like a mercenary band?
Yeah.
They were two random travelers on the road.
Yeah.
Who then were very much like terrorized by the White Cloaks, threatened with murder, threatened with torture, etc., etc.
It's wild to me that Perrin's defense is not like, the White Cloaks were threatening us. The White Cloaks, notorious extremist group.
Yeah, we were terrified of the White Cloaks because they grab people.
Yeah.
He could have been like, my friend Edwene is a recent, channeler. I was very worried that something bad would happen to her if they caught her.
Yeah.
And Morgause at one point is like, well, we can't call Edwene to trial. And I'm like, you can. Teleportation exists.
Yeah.
And also that would be extremely funny if the Amerlincy
just showed up and was like, yes, the White Cloaks were threatening us.
Yeah, it was not the worst captivity of my life, I'm sorry to say, but in the top 5 for sure.
Yeah.
Poor Egg. I'm just now realizing how much of Egg's character arc is captivity.
I know.
The White Cloaks, the Shanshin, the White Tower.
I know. Love that for women.
Yeah, great. So, I don't really know what the point I'm making is. Just that this trial is never going to feel like a good thing or like something that Perrin can eke any honor out of.
Yeah.
When it's just such a joke that, he killed a couple of White Cloaks.
Yeah.
That's a nothing offense.
Yeah. Yeah. Because, not to, beat the point, but, it'd be different than Perrin attacking, like you said, farmers, other people on the road, even necessarily, another group of soldiers who were just, confused about what was going on. These are people who just notoriously kidnap and torture civilians. So, not to say that their lives are inherently any less meaningless, but it does not hold the same weight in a court of law to be I was being terrorized by the White Cloaks as it would have been I killed a couple of other people in cold blood.
Yeah, this is okay, say, if we're gonna stretch the metaphor, this is if the KKK entered Canada.
Yeah.
And two people, one of them black.
Yeah.
Were we're going to hide from the KKK. And then when they could no longer hide from the KKK, defended themselves with lethal force.
Yeah.
And then it's if the Queen of Canada was oh yeah, mercenary bands.
2 mercenary bands fighting each other.
What the fuck?
What are you talking about?
But that's not the point of the trial to make sense or anything.
Yeah.
It's all just to paint Perrin in a certain light. Mm-hmm. And to make us think wow, Perrin equals character development. And also Galad equals character development. Because despite our discomfort with the fact, Galad for some reason is getting the full 5-star character development treatment in this book.
Yeah, when Morgause pronounces this judgment, she's you're guilty. And Galad's great, let's execute him.
Yeah, and Morgause is well, it can be a lesser sentence.
Yeah.
She's but I'm turning it over to you to... And everyone's well, what's the point? He's not going to, abide by the sentencing.
What's the point of having a judge if you yourself do not pronounce the sentence? If you're just I'm actually going to hand it over to the leader of the group of people who claim 2 of their guys were murdered.
Yeah,
That's
wild.
really fair.
But
sorry, this scene is really setting me off for some reason.
But it's we have to give Galad character development.
Yeah.
Morgause's character development doesn't mean anything to us. Galad's does for some reason.
It doesn't.
But, by giving it to Galad, it's oh, now we have the possibility of Galad extending mercy one day.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the fact that Perrin is I'll abide by your sentence as long as it's after the last battle, then, now Perrin gets to be honorable, like a good protagonist should be. And I mean, okay, it's so interesting that Perrin is getting raked over the coals for stuff that he did in earlier books, whereas Rand, as we have strenuously pointed out, has gotten away scot-free with his many crimes against humanity. Where's Rand's courtroom scene?
Why isn't Rand being put on trial right now?
Yeah.
But no, we have to waste an seemingly infinite amount of page space on this whole ridiculous excuse for integrity TM, the man story. Ugh. Guys make me sick.
There's also Fail acting extremely unprofessionally. When Morgause pronounces Perrin guilty, she just gets up and starts screaming at her, and it's like,
It's like,
do you think that will help, girl?
Did you hear that story of the guy who like tackled a judge? I saw it on TikTok, so again, take it for a grain of salt. But this lady was telling the story. She's like, if I were the lawyer and I was like about to, and it sounded like he was about to get like a decent sentence, you know, and he just like got up and tackled the judge. That's how Fail is behaving.
Yeah, it's like, girl.
Like, I get it. You think your husband's going to be murdered. But also, everyone in the army has agreed that Perrin is not going to be murdered, that they will step in and defend him, so.
The only other thing that happens in this stupid trial is that Byar reveals himself as an unreliable witness. And in a scene later where he's kind of walking around with Galad and again pushing for Galad to just go after Perrin and murder him, we see that like Bornhald is very troubled by the fact that his friend has been lying to him this entire time about what exactly he saw. Mm-hmm. You know, he just trusted Byar implicitly that he'd seen Perrin kill his dad, and now he's like, oh, it sounds like it was not that at all. Which I just want to point out because we're getting like a late stage characterization here of Byar as a quote unquote bad apple.
Yeah.
When in fact Byar has been pretty indicative of the White Cloaks as a whole this entire time. Mm-hmm. But it's just more of this like, we must somehow redeem the White Cloaks as a force, because at this stage in the book we are trying to redeem everyone as a force. Anyone, you know, who could theoretically kill a Trolloc. Mm-hmm. And it's like, that's such a weird exercise in this whole good versus evil plot.
Yeah, like, I find the whole thing distasteful. I think we've said that about the White Cloaks already, that it's distasteful to try and, like, bring them into the... I don't think it's distasteful to try and, like, bring them in as a force. Like, sure, you're literally facing the last battle, trying to do the same thing with the Shan-Chen, so, like, why not the White Cloaks as well? But I don't need... As with Tuon, I don't need Galad et al's points of view to be like, oh, I need to kind of like redeem this force and make you believe that they're important and worth your sympathy or something. It's just like, if you want to use them as a military force, that's fine with me, I guess. I think it's a gray area of morality, sure, but...
Yeah, just like the project of this book is not being like, hey, the ultimate fight is between good versus evil, and anyone who can hold a sword can fight on the side of good as long as they are killing bad guys.
Yeah.
The argument instead that Robert Jordan is presenting is like, this is a battle between good and evil, and anyone who fights on the side of good must be in some way good.
Yeah.
And I have to prove that they are in some way good or redeemable.
Yeah.
And it's like, that's not actually, like, as interesting as the former, in my opinion.
I agree, like,
That's not how war works. That's not even how, like, most good versus evil plots work.
No, and it's especially interesting in this instance with, like, the whole concept of the last battle is not like we lose the last battle and then there's, like, a dark overlord. It's like we lose the last battle and the world ceases to exist. It's like, maybe there's just some people who don't want to stop existing. Like, maybe even if they are a fundamentally bad person, they are for the world continuing to be.
Yeah, there's like this weird framing of this is good versus evil, when in fact it's like existence versus non-existence.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, can we clarify which it is?
Yeah.
Because it does seem to matter now that we're getting into the whole semantics and ethics of it.
Yeah, like, facing down annihilation is a very different thing than being like, I need to prove myself as a good person. Mm-hmm. Like, most creatures will fight against being killed or wiped off the planet. Mm-hmm. That's kind of in our, like, survival mechanism, locked into our freaky little brains. Robert?
Yeah, what's going on, Robert?
When I find you, Robert...
We get a quick scene from Egg as she is preparing to go into Teleron Riyadh. Just real quick here, again, want to bring up the timeline shenanigans. Egg tells us that she has tried multiple times to ensnare Masana by various traps, so we know that there's been a time jump since the last time we saw her. Which means, approximately, that it's been weeks, multiple weeks, since Rand visited the White Tower and Egg consolidated rule there. We know she is going to bed at the same time as Perrin is going to bed because they are going to intersect. Perrin, meanwhile, it has been maybe days since he saw Rand do his enlightenment journey in the world of dreams. It's buck wild.
Time doesn't exist anymore.
Like, we've been kind of this entire time being like, yeah, surely it will make sense eventually when we get there. It doesn't make sense when we get there. There's no way it makes sense. The math does not add up. So it's just like, okay. Anyway, Egg's like, get ready. She's also like, I'm gonna be meeting the Wise Ones and the Sea Folk. Meanwhile, Swan's gonna be like commandeering a force some otherwhere in Teleron Riyadh. Also, please send another letter to Gawain, because he has not responded to the last one, and I'm sure it's because it was very rude, so.
Send a nice one.
Send a nice one. And I'm like, Egg, I get that you're trying to, like, maintain that you are the Amerlin seat and that he needs to accept that, but it is also, like, extremely wild that you would be like, come back, I need you, and not send that as yourself.
Yeah, have your secretary send your baby, I miss you letter. It's weird.
Like, in the scale between Gawain and Egg's crimes in their relationship, obviously Gawain is much more the perpetrator, but, like, Egg is also not behaving super maturely about the whole thing.
No, and, like, I get it. She's, like, what, 18 and a half?
Yeah.
She's allowed to act like an idiot in some areas of her life, so I guess her relationship with Gawain is not a bad one, but it is, like, sometimes in relationships, you have to be the bigger person. You just have to. And Gawain's obviously not going to. So if you want him to come back, you might just have to be like, I'm sorry I upset you. I would like you to come back.
Yeah.
Not that I think you should have to, because Gawain should be an adult.
If only. Perrin and everyone return to their camp. Fails, like, starts yelling at him about how dumb he is. Perrin starts yelling back because, you know, that's the boundary that Fail has maintained in their relationship, is sometimes we want to have screaming fights with each other. And I'm like, but guys, you're in public.
Yeah.
Like, at one point... Okay, sorry for that. That was Tybalt's tail. Like, Perrin mentions at one point that people are, like, listening and watching, and then doesn't mention onlookers at all. Nor does he mention that they have moved, so it's a very confusing scene. It's like, how many people are witnessing Perrin talk about going into the wolf dream to retrieve the magic item?
How could you listen to this trial and then listen to the screaming matches that your alleged general is having with his wife in the village green and not be like, is he of sound mind and body?
Yeah, Perrin is giving the people more proof that he's crazy than, frankly, Rand did through the first 8 or 9 books.
Yeah, it's a little alarming. Just be like, I have some questions about, quote-unquote, the wolves.
Yeah. The wolves, Perrin? Really? The wolves? Let's get into that.
I would just like to know what's going on.
Anyway, Perrin's like, I'm going into Teleron Riyadh and you can't stop me. But get everyone ready to go. And Fail's like, fine, bestie, but we'll talk about this later. And he's like, okay. Then we see him go into the wolf dream, Teleron Riyadh, meet up with Hopper. They go into the dome, the no traveling zone, accompanied by some helpful wolves. And of course are ambushed by Slayer. There's a whole fight scene, which culminates in Perrin eventually finding this, like, spike thing. You know, we know it's the dream spike. So he grabs that and takes off with it while the wolves are distracting Slayer. So what is probably happening in the real world is that suddenly Grady and Niald can travel. But as Perrin moves through the world of dreams, the no traveling zone is moving with him.
Yeah. He's just making another no traveling zone.
Yeah, because he doesn't know how to turn this thing off or otherwise get rid of it. The fight scene itself is fine, you know, action-y. It's very, look at what a badass Perrin is. Similar to Matt fighting the Golem. But otherwise, no complaints.
It's fine.
It's a fight scene. I think it's remarkable how clear Brandon is able to make the fight scene.
Yeah.
Considering how wonky the World of Dreams is, but, like, you're able to keep track of everyone's bodies and what they're doing. Except for one point, Perrin does swing the hammer and it slips and it says it's an axe.
Yeah.
Like, and I don't think that's a liminal World of Dreams thing. I think Brandon's
Brandon's like, fuck if I know if it's a hammer or an axe anymore. And Brandon, I can relate to that.
Yeah, it's a kind of Freudian slip on the part of the authors that cracked me up. But that's where we leave Perrin, charging off with this dream spike in hand, presumably about to intersect in some ironic way with Egg, who is about to have a knockdown fight in Tel'aran'rhiod herself. But that's where we left off.
Yeah, it's fine. It's nice for Perrin to finally be putting the pieces together. Like, when we heard Grendel be like, put this fucking dream spike in it however long ago, it's nice. I get frustrated by plots like that when, like, I know the answer and it goes on for a really long time and the characters don't know the answer.
Yeah, like, what's going on?
Yeah, it just gets really old really fast, and it just feels particularly drawn out in this book series where there's many points of view, so maybe it isn't that much time for Perrin's timeline. Who knows the way Perrin's timeline is actually going, but it feels like an incredibly long time that he's not putting the pieces together. So nice to have that done.
Some other logistical things, like, just to keep an eye on, Morgause left the White Cloaks and came back to Perrin's camp, which is an extremely ballsy move considering she just more or less sentenced him to
Death.
Everyone's like, this is awkward.
Yeah.
Basil Gill and the others who were initially captured by the White Cloaks have been released. So that's great for them if you were worried. Perrin is sending his armies, once they can travel, to toward Whitebridge, that place where Tom, quote-unquote, died way back in book 1.
Tom beefed it.
And at the same time, the White Cloaks are also breaking camp and marching away. So,
yep, they're gone.
Yep, goodbye.
Goodbye.
Or are they? So that's what's going on.
Yeah. Galad has a pretty funny interaction with Byar, is my only thing, where Byar is acting like a little bitch, and Galad's like, you're being quite insubordinate.
And it troubles me. And then he goes, and it should trouble you too.
Yeah.
And Byar's like,
and I'm like, Galad kind of ate that.
Yeah, okay. Tell me more, boss man.
Yeah, disciplinary actions.
Ooh. What are you gonna do, spank him?
Yeah, it's pretty wild.
Okay. Thanks for hanging in there with us. I guess my overall mood would be mad.
Yeah. Obviously, if you guys didn't get that throughout this episode, I'm really pissed about this whole scene.
The next few chapters are just gonna be, like, action-y.
Egg
and Perrin.
Tybalt is here to say hello to everybody. Tybalt is in his pirate shirt.
And he's purring. And so let's give him a moment of silence.
He's a little camera shy.
Yeah, he's shy.
Microphone
he's
shy.
Not like Ed, who will just purr into the microphone at a moment's notice.
Ed's been asleep on my bed for...
Okay, everyone. Thank you for listening. Thanks to Glenna McKenzie for our theme song. Thanks to our patrons on Patreon and our followers on social media. Anything to add?
No.
Okie dokie.
I think I've said enough.
Do you have a sign off?
I guess the only thing I have that is even possible for a sign off this week is that I read the most recent Murderbot book, System Collapse. Emily's also read it. She just read it a long time before me. And it's really good. And I think you all should go get it.
Yeah, for real.
It's incredible. Like, we've talked about the first 4 Murderbot novellas on our We Don't Watch Outlander podcast on our Patreon. So if you've listened to that, or if you've just read Murderbot, the Murderbot Diaries series, you know how utterly delightful it is. And this is a truly excellent installment in that franchise. For sure.
Speaking of We Don't Watch Outlander, you may remember that we covered the Atlas 6. The third of the trilogy came out, I think, this week.
Oh my gosh, did it? We have to go get it.
No, catch me getting it in the airport on Friday.
Yeah! I gotta check in with my number one favorite, most hated character, Callum. I absolutely love that fucking menace to society.
Okay, everyone, have a great week.
Bye.